I guess. I'd like to welcome you to my talk. I'm Jason Surow, and I'll be talking about vaccines today. I'm a member of the Fitness, Health, and Wellness Committee, and we put on 2, 3, 4 lectures and events per month here, more during the high season. All the lectures that we've had can be found, almost all the lectures can be found on our YouTube channel called River Strand Fitness Committee, and can be accessed through Member Central. Go to Member Central, go to Committees, Fitness Committee, and you can get to the link and rewatch the lectures. Upcoming from our committee on April 10th, we have a speaker from Sarasota Memorial Hospital talking on lifestyle as medicine, what we can do with our lifestyles to improve our health, keep us healthy. We also have Beth Abarca doing meditation, and I don't have a date for that right now, but one will be set up. You can look at our page and see where we are. We also have a bicycle club being started by Micah Paganelli, and news for that will be out very, very soon. So I'd like to tell you about today's lecture. And I want to start with the elephant in the room, which is the political nature of this talk. I was actually hoping to have a room full of people who were angrily, with pitchforks, saying how bad vaccines are, and a group of people with halos over their heads saying how good vaccines are, because the truth is somewhere in between. And I'd like to get at that, but not about the politics. In fact, I'd like to invite everyone, or encourage everyone, not to become political. We can talk about policy, but let's keep the politics out of this.
There you go. How are you? Huh?
So I want to again point out that the policy is different than the science. Policy involves subjective decisions based not only on the science, but also on economics, social and scientific information. When we set policy, we can try to use the science to inform us as to what one of the legs of that might be. But again, there's very difference between science and politics, and in fact, that's one of the big problems I think with the COVID, that the policy got in the way of the real science. In fact, science doesn't speak. You don't learn anything from science. You can use the science for our purposes, but it does not tell us what to do. So in today's lecture, we're going to talk about a few things: the basic biology, vaccines, how they work, how they're made, the history of them, the good parts of vaccines, the downside of vaccines, and also some of the controversies, including what the Catholic Church has to say about vaccines or certain vaccines. We'll also talk about COVID, and then we'll talk a bit about public concerns like autism and like mercury in vaccines. So we're going to talk about biology first. It's going to be boring. It may be more in depth than we need, but to understand vaccines, we need to understand the biology behind it. I promise you it'll be more interesting when we get to the picture part of the discussion. So go to sleep if you want, tune out until we get to that part. The two invaders we're talking about are bacteria and viruses. They are different in their physiology. Bacteria have cell membranes, but that is different than an animal cell membrane, but has no nucleus. It has a DNA blueprint that makes messenger RNA, which tells the cell what to do and does the work for the cell. They need some kind of food source to grow, and an environment, and that food source and environment can be our body. It can live on the outside of our body, or it can invade our body. And it may harm the host when it does so. Viruses are different. They have no cell membrane. In fact, they have no way to replicate themselves. They have no machinery. All they have is the DNA is material, programming material that can make protein, but it can only make that protein when it's in a host cell, when it hijacks the host to make what it needs to make. And in doing so, it usually harms the host. Not all bacteria are harmful. Some are more harmful than others, and we call those pathogenic bacteria. Pathogenic meaning causing pathos, causing disease. And sometimes it's not the bacteria, but chemicals that the bacteria make that are the harmful substances. I want to be clear about a few terms I use. Things that are being infected may be called the host or the body or the person. The host could be an animal instead of a human, or it could be a bacteria instead of a human. Things that are doing the infecting I may call viruses, bacteria, germs, or invaders. And the antigen is the thing on the bacteria or virus or human, a part of the thing that the immune system will react to. It starts the immune process, antigen. So how does a cell know what to do? It is the proteins that do the work, but the blueprint is in the DNA. And as you see here, DNA is being transcribed to messenger RNA. That is, there are parts of the cell that will read the DNA and make the messenger RNA, which will be important when we talk about an mRNA vaccine later. And that messenger RNA, by other parts of the cell, gets translated into protein. And it is the proteins that do the work of the cell. The work of the cell could be to eat, to divide into two, to kill a cancer cell, to make insulin. So these are the things that a cell may do, and it needs the proteins to do that. There are three types of immunity. The first, on the bottom of the list here, is passive immunity. It's transient. It's not from us, it's given to us. We get immunoglobulins from others. In the case of newborn babies, it's from the mother's breast milk. We can get it for certain diseases intravenously or even injected into the muscle. But what we're talking about here right now are the immune system, which is innate or adaptive. And you see here on the left side of the screen the adaptive system, and on the right side the innate. The innate system is pre-programmed. It's in us already. Our DNA has programmed us to be born with it to be able to handle things in a non-specific way. We have, it includes bacterial killing substances on our skin and in our mucous membranes in our nose and throat and respiratory tract and our GI tract as well. It has cells, including what they call our scavenger cells, but we'll talk about that in a little more detail, that will attack anything that it recognizes as not self. If it can't handle the problem, it then will pass off information to the adaptive immune system. The adaptive immune system is slower in its signaling, but it's specific. It learns from what's attacking us what to react to. It gets signals from the innate system to the adaptive, and then it starts to make a variety of cells, including B lymphocytes, which mostly circulate in the blood, and T lymphocytes, which are in the blood and also in tissues as well. And the antibodies that are made are not only attack the thing itself, but coordinate the defense. Here is a real picture on our left of a macrophage, a scavenger cell that is part of the innate system. It's floating around, and if it don't know you, it's going to attack you. And you see it here eating bacteria, bringing them in to the inside of it where they're digested. I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if it's a real picture or not, but you see the tentacles coming out of that macrophage, looking for something, being attracted to it, and then grabbing it, kind of like the Matrix. This is a busy slide, but let me point out a few of the things, because this really tells us the entire story here. Here is a pathogen here, and we'll see it again here. Oops, not what I wanted, sorry. Laser pointer. And not working. Great. Okay, do you see my arrow? Can't see my arrow. Okay. Here is an antigen virus. Here in this case, it looks like a corona, or looks some kind of virus with a halo around, a coronavirus perhaps. It comes into contact with a macrophage, which I said before wants to eat it, does eat it, and tries to break it down. That macrophage will also present that, take it and show it to a T lymphocyte. The T lymphocyte may stimulate one of the other T lymphocytes called a cytotoxic T, or a killer cell. And that killer cell will not only kill the bacteria, but kill any cell infected with it. And that dead cell and dead bacteria get sort of into gunk, which we call pus. When we see pus, it is dead tissue and white blood cells together. The T lymphocytes also speaks to the B lymphocyte. The B lymphocyte makes plasma cells, which make antibodies. The antibodies can attack the antigen, the invader itself, but also works along with the macrophages we saw here to come to that area and attack the invader. So they work together. And lastly, the T cells and the B cells form memory cells. Memory cells linger forever. The B cells may go down in the bloodstream. We don't want the blood to be too thick with with antibodies, I meant to say, antibodies go down. We don't want the blood to have lots of antibodies forever against everything, because the blood could become very, very thick with that. So instead, it may go down in time, yet the memory cells remain, and in minutes after encountering a second time with that bacteria or virus, it can react to it. That's important because people who talk about losing that vaccines don't work because the level of antibodies go down over time don't remember about the memory cells. And again, those antibodies that I was talking about coordinate with different types of cells to cause injury. In fact, the natural killer cell may, if it detects some of our own cells being abnormal or tissues being abnormal, they can attack it. And that's part of the way the body tries to protect itself against cancers. It may destroy abnormal cells. The surface of the cell is very important. This is the surface membrane. This is the inside of the cell, this would be the outside of the cell. And it's not smooth, but it has proteins on the surface, markers, sort of QR codes. The QR codes say, here I am, I'm part of this body, I'm this part of the body. In fact, there's a fancy name for it, the major histocompatibility antigen, or the HLA. Some of you may have heard that if you have rheumatoid arthritis. But it marks self from non-self. On the surface of the cell, there are probably 2,500 different proteins and thousands of copies of each. Here you see a cell surface with some markers. This is a scanning electron microscope. So you see the lumps and bumps of receptors in the cell. But this here is a rubella virus coming out. Rubella has infected that cell, and it's coming out through the membrane to go into the blood or mucus or whatever and infect somebody else, try to infect somebody else. And here you see influenza virus that is attacking this cell. But it's not just haphazard. They are on certain receptors of the cell. The cell membrane is where the action is. And so, I told you about those markers. Those are often the antigen, the thing that a virus or bacteria wants to attach to, or the immune system wants to attach to, or that we teach the immune system to want to attach to. And it often does so with a antibody, or also called an immunoglobulin. This portion, this Y portion, can detect a certain antigen. Again, antigen is the part of the living thing that the body reacts to. So it sees the antigen And has an affinity towards that and not anything else. Things that are close, yes, but things that are different, no. And here you see a pathogen. And here's this antibody, and that's the shape of the receptor, like a lock and key. And this virus has a triangular receptor, triangular antigen meant for this, or this is meant for that, and it will latch onto that and help kill it. But it won't help to kill that one there. That receptor is different. That antigen is different. So unless the antigen, and the body may respond to that, another one too, but not necessarily. So how do vaccines work? Vaccines work by fooling the body into thinking that it has been attacked by something, by an attacker, invader, and trying to induce that kind of immunity that we just saw. The goals are to make T or B cells or antibodies that last long, that prevent reinfection by that or other things, or at least to prevent or lessen disease if we get it. And lastly, we don't want it to cause harm. We don't want it to cause the body to be harmed by the vaccine or caused by an infection or any other infection if it happens later on. We'll see examples of that in just a little bit. You also hear a lot about natural immunity. What is natural immunity? It's getting lucky. It's getting the infection and being lucky that you don't die or don't get harmed by it. If a disease has a mortality rate of 5% and 100 people get it, 95% will live, 5% will die. But the ones that haven't died have immunity to it. Natural immunity, it's not by your nature, you got infected and survived. Now you may be harmed by it, you may be blind or have neurological problems or death. You may have birth defects in your child, but that's what natural immunity is. Usually vaccination will avoid these problems. So what do we do to induce immunity? Well, what we do is we introduce something into the body that goes to the T or B cells in the bloodstream or in the lymph nodes usually. The messenger RNA vaccines introduce it, injection of the muscle where it meets the lymphocyte, which is why you get sore in your arm with an mRNA vaccine more than you do with a flu vaccine, which is in the bloodstream. The vaccines train the immune system to recognize that part in the ways that we showed before. But in order to do that, we need to find an antigen that the body can react to. And that antigen has to be one that will prevent the virus or bacteria from growing the next time it shows up. And it also needs to be an antigen that induces an antibody or defense that stays and doesn't go away in a week or a month or 5 years. And I'll show you in a moment how that's kind of like playing Jenga. Well, for a virus, viruses are much simpler than bacteria, as we said before, have many fewer proteins. In fact, the influenza protein, a flu, only has eight pieces of RNA and 8 proteins. By the way, let me tell you again, the flu, people often call colds the flu. The flu is very, very different. You may have similar symptoms, mild symptoms of runny nose, sneezing, coughing, fever, but not every cold is the flu, although colloquially it's called having the flu. Influenza A and B, the A is typically more severe, has only 8 proteins. 2 of them we see here called hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, H and N, we'll see in a moment, and some proteins inside as well. So like Jenga, or a reverse Jenga, here's the tower, and if we want to pull one stick out and have it fall to this, we need to figure out which stick it is. There's a problem though. Bacteria have lots of sticks, lots of sticks. The base is very wide. It's hard to find one to pull out that will do it. Secondly, certain viruses change themselves all the time, rearrange their sticks every time. So a week later, or a month later, or 2 years later, it's different. HIV is famous for this. We can't make a vaccine that works because it keeps on changing its antigens. And influenza does that too, as we'll see, which is why every year they try to figure out what vaccine do we need to use to try to make it effective. Everyone before 1972 has one of these, right, on your arm?
No, family doctor said I'm a girl, did it underneath, so
Really?
I never showed.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
smart, right?
Yeah, and he was a man.
Those Canadians are smart.
I'll be there.
My sister and I have them underneath.
Wow.
So, smallpox vaccine. Smallpox is a severe disease. It killed 1 out of 3 of people who got it. It killed 500 million people, more than all other infectious diseases ever put together.
Jesus. Oh my God.
1977 in India. In 1978, thanks to vaccinations, the last natural wild infection with smallpox occurred. And in 1980, the World Health Organization declared it gone from the face of the earth. It exists now, hopefully, only in vials in certain biohazard labs. 2 boys, two sets of siblings, one vaccinated, one not. First on the left was in 1901, 15 and 21 years. These 2 13-year-old boys vaccinated at the same time. And scarring afterward. You do not want to get smallpox. Smallpox also had a very important historical and military importance. The smallpox virus went around in outbreaks for centuries in Europe and in Africa. But it hadn't reached the New World, hadn't reached the Americas. Soldiers and sailors from Europe had some immunity to it, many of them did, whereas the Americans did not. When Columbus came in 1792, there were 72 million Indians in North America. By 1800, only 600,000 remained. When Hernando Cortez came in 1519, he had 400 men. He conquered the Aztec Empire, where after millions of Aztecs died, and the Aztecs interpreted that as divine intervention, a curse or a plague on them. It was disease, not steel, that rid the Aztecs. The vaccines have their roots in smallpox. In the 1700s, a process called variolation was done, where someone with smallpox had a weeping boil on them, and they would take a string and pass it through, with the string dry out. Then they take someone else and stick them with a knife, with something sharp, and then draw that string days or more later through that, giving them the virus. What we'll come to understand in a moment is they gave them a weakened form of the virus, because in days the virus started to die. And that lessened the likelihood of becoming infected. But the rate of infection, of death rather, was about 2% with that. But the rate of death with getting the virus outright was about 15 to 20%. So one of the questions is, should you do it, or should you take a chance by getting the virus? In 1796, Edward Jenner in London realized that milkmaids would get boils on their hand called cowpox that looked a lot like smallpox, and they didn't seem to get smallpox. He thought maybe that protected you. So he began to take the boils, the pus from the boil of the milkmaid, and inject it, scratch the skin of other people, which he called variole vaccinae, smallpox of the cow. And it worked. It prevented smallpox. Cow, vaca, vaccine. That's where we get the word vaccinate from the word cow, Spanish, Latin and Spanish word cow. That was the first vaccine. 100 years later, 1885, Louis Pasteur, a chemist that was studying microbiology and pasteurized milk, discovering and realized that there must be some kind of being, some kind of being we now know as bacteria in it. That's what pasteurization did, killed that by boiling it. He made the first rabies vaccine. That rabies was 100% fatal. He realized, though, if you took a rabies in a dog, injected that into a rabbit who got rabies, then took that rabbit and took some of that pus out or blood out, injected another rabbit and another 21 times, that if you then took the infected tissue, which happened to be spinal cord, which is a neurologic virus, took that tissue and injected it into another dog, it didn't get rabies. While studying this, a boy named Joseph Meister got bitten by a rabbit dog, came to Pasteur, and he one day injected the 15-day dry it out. I did say dry out, the last rabbit, he would dry out for 15 days, the spinal cord. And injected a 15-day dried virus, and the next day injected a 14-day dried out virus, and a 13-day, 12, 11, 10, and the boy never got the virus, never got rabies. So he realized that somehow exposing this virus that had learned to grow in rabbits, but not dogs or humans, was much less likely to cause disease, and that by drying out, he probably also injured the virus more, so that didn't cause disease.
Those were protocols they just developed themselves. Out of
Common
They didn't even
sense.
know. I don't even know. The 1800s microscopes are very new. I'm not even sure they saw anything then. They did not know about viruses and bacteria. They knew the way they found out what wasn't the difference between a bacteria and a virus is you could take, if you had a porcelain pot, you could pour infected water or infected liquid through it, and what came out no longer had bacteria in it. It was not infectious anymore. But things that did pass through, they thought were something else that weren't bacteria, and indeed it was viruses, because viruses could pass through them. But they still had no idea what it was. What happens when DNA changes? DNA changes are called a mutation. A mutation changes the virus and can change it in one of several ways. How contagious it is, how likely it spreads from one host to another, making it more or less infectious. If it's more infectious in a pandemic, an epidemic, it may outcompete the other viruses, and the less contagious go away, like it did with the Delta variation, the Omicron variation of the COVID virus. Or it can become less infectious, less contagious, and it may die out. It can make it more harmful to the host, or it can make it less harmful to the host. And that's what we're hoping to do by these things, make it less harmful to the host by inducing variations, or some combination of the above. How does a gene mutation work? Well, here is a gene, right here, or DNA rather, and if that part of the gene gets injured, then the proteins that it makes will look different. Instead of being this nice Pac-Man with a triangular shape, it instead has a different shape. And now that antibody that was trying to get that kind of triangular shape no longer can fit there, no longer can attack that. And thus, it's immune. That germ is now immune to our immune system, and it's safe from our immune system. We've lost our immunity towards that bacteria or virus.
So that means it can harm you more.
Yes, it can harm you again.
Again.
Maybe less, maybe more, but our immune system may not work anymore for us. Back to influenza. I told you before that the two important proteins are called hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, H and N. The hemagglutinin is the thing that attaches to the cell and enters the cell, a human cell. The neuraminidase, once the virus is made, breaks out of the cell. But there are 18 different hemagglutinins and 11 different neuramidases. And what can happen is there can be a recombination of the same type of virus. An H1N1 virus may if it infects the same cell that's already infected with an H5N2, you can get crossover. And now you have an H1N2 and an H5N1. That's why you keep hearing that the virus now is an H1N1 or an H3N5 virus, because there are different types. They have different tendencies to be infectious, and antibodies and vaccines will work differently for them. The change, the subtle change in the proteins over time of a vaccine is called antigenic drift. It drifts from what it was at first and may make it less interesting or to our immune system, may be less able to attack that by changing the binding sites. It may create a new strain which is not attacked easily. It may make it easier to spread in the population. And that's why we need to constantly update our vaccines towards influenza, which drifts, as we said, and even other things like COVID, which drifts as well. A reservoir is another being that holds the viruses. Bats, COVID went from bats to civets to humans. Others as well. Bats often are a reservoir. A severe 2009 swine flu epidemic started in 1990 with a H1N1 swine, pig flu. Also, around then, came this human virus, H3N2, that mixed with a bird virus. That was the 1990s. It happened, those swirled around in different animals for a long time, and in 2000 it was recognized that there was a swine H3N2 and an H1N2. And in 2009, all three of those combined. And now we had a 2009 human H1N1 that had some swine DNA, it had some bird DNA, and human DNA. That's right, and DNA from the human virus. And again, our immune system never seen anything like that. Hasn't seen anything like that, can't defend it against it well, and it was a severe, severe virus. So, what types of vaccines do we have? What can we use? Well, there are 6 or 7 different types, and we'll talk about those separately right now. One is what Pasteur did. He attenuated the virus, did something to weaken it so it can't harm the host. And Pasteur did it by going from dog to rabbit, then to rabbit to rabbit to rabbit, and he also injured it slightly by drying it out. Pasteur did it with a similar virus, with the cowpox virus, very close to, but not the same as the smallpox virus. And those mechanisms, that mechanism of a live attenuated virus, are used for measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, rotavirus, smallpox, and yellow fever right now. We can kill the virus. We can take a virus, we can grow it, and then put chemicals on it like formaldehyde. And the formaldehyde breaks it up enough that it no longer is can grow. So we can inject that whole virus into the body. It doesn't have the ability to grow, but the immune system looks at the different antigens and creates antigens against them and protects us. And that's used now for hepatitis, polio, the old polio, and the newer rabies vaccine. We can use part of the antigen. It can be the body or the liquid that's made from it. Subunit vaccines don't use the whole virus, but just something from the virus, a piece of the virus. But that piece, again, has to be picked to be effective for the immune system to work well. Hepatitis B, HPV, we'll talk about in a minute. Shingles, Haemophilus influenza type B, pneumococcus, and the Novavax COVID virus all use that subunit method. Sometimes it isn't the bacteria that causes the harm or that needs to be neutralized, but rather a toxin that's made, something that comes out of the bacteria, that it produces. And that's called getting a toxoid, when we somehow change that toxin by putting chemicals on it like formaldehyde and change it slightly. It develops antibodies against that, and that's called the antibodies against the toxoid. And diphtheria, tetanus, and the current pertussis, all are made that way. By the way, interesting note about diphtheria, almost 100% fatal. In the winter of 24-25, in Nome, Alaska, there was an outbreak in a town of 10,000 people, where half the people had died in the 1918 flu. And 50 kids got diphtheria, and we no longer had the antitoxin, the antibodies against that, because it expired. And antitoxin didn't last very long, a few days. So they had a dog sled race. Iditarod. 5.5 days, I went 674 miles to deliver fresh antitoxin to save the town from death. And that's where the Iditarod race came from. Also in 1902, there was a bad batch of toxoid made, and the next year a law, I forgot what it's called, was made, and 2 years later the FDA was created to ensure that our foods and drugs, or drugs, not foods, were safe at that time. So it came out of a diphtheria crisis. Another way of making a vaccine is to use part of a gene itself, a viral gene itself, against itself. And what we've heard about, and the most common is called a recombinant vaccine, or a Trojan horse vaccine. And what we do in that is we take out part of the virus's genes. We can cut the virus's genes and insert that into a virus that's harmless, a cold virus, or even milder than a cold virus, and then give the person that vaccine. The oral polio vaccine is one of those. You take it by mouth, you get sick with the virus. It doesn't harm you, but you have the virus. And the new instructions that we put into that virus were out of the deadly virus you're trying to prevent. So you cause the human body, to make that virus protein that the body then reacts with its immune system against. And that's called a Trojan horse, or a recombinant virus. Influenza, the Johnson & Johnson COVID virus, Ebola, and malaria viruses are made that way. The newest way is by, instead of using a virus, benign virus, also called a vector virus or Trojan horse virus, we can inject the mRNA itself that we showed you how to make before. We can inject that right into the host, the person, and have the person make the viral portion, the viral protein, that the person's body then reacts to as an invader. So when we give mRNA for the spike protein for COVID, we're making the spike protein, but none of the other parts of the virus. It would be like giving just the hemagglutinin for the influenza, and not any other part of the influenza. It can't get you sick because all it is the surface. That's all it's doing. It's like showing up a picture to the police saying, anyone who sees this person, arrest them before they commit a crime. And that's used right now for the COVID from Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. How viruses grow. We got to make the virus, or part of the virus, to inject into a human, to give to a human somehow. And there are several ways to do it. One way, and the most common way, has been the chicken eggs. The United States has, for the past 80 years, has multiple secret chicken farms around the country with hundreds of millions of chickens that produce millions of eggs. And every day 100,000 eggs are sent to processing plants where they are used to make vaccines. They get injected with a virus. After several days, the liquid from the egg is removed, and in that is enough to make about one vaccine, 15 microgram vaccine. And so in the year 2019-2020, 172 million doses of flu vaccine were given out. 82% were made from chicken egg, which means 140 million chicken eggs were used for that. We do that every year.
Not the chicken itself, they do it to the egg that the chicken's already hatched, right?
Chickens hatch the egg,
Right.
take the egg, fresh, disease-free. That's why the government has their own farm. They have to be disease-free. Years and years ago, in the 60s, they used some eggs that had other viruses in it, simian viruses that were afraid were going to cause cancer. They never didn't cause cancer, but they were afraid they would. So what is an epidemic? What's a pandemic? They talk about not the disease itself, but how rapidly the disease is spreading. Endemic means that the disease is consistently present, but not a particular reason, like malaria in Africa. It's all over. At a low level, but it's always there. Epidemic means it's increasingly unexpectedly in a confined area. And it doesn't have to be measles, as an example. Right now we're getting epidemics of measles in certain areas, but also can be smoking or obesity. You can have certain areas where smoking is epidemic, or obesity is epidemic. A pandemic is exponential growth, growing faster and faster and faster every day in multiple countries. And by the way, we get about 3 pandemics per century. This ain't over, folks. For centuries, there have been, centuries and centuries, multiple pandemics that come and go. And then something mutates and you get another one. And it's going to happen. One of the reasons that pandemics are less deadly now than they have been in the past is that one of the things that killed you is the secondary bacterial infection that would come along with the viral disease that we can handle now with antibiotics. But more are coming, more pandemics are coming. Herd immunity is also a word tossed around a lot. It's not just magical immunity from being around the disease, people who have the disease. It is the result of getting the infection or getting a vaccine. The percentage of the population that needs to be vaccinated to prevent exponential growth or any growth, to increase the number of people getting it, you need a certain number of people to be vaccinated. Think about playing dodgeball or tag against people around you, and when someone is immune, they become just a steel pillar. Well, it's hard to find someone to hit when enough people have turned into steel pillars, because there's people to hide behind. Without that, if you're able to throw that ball and infect someone else, it bounces off of you and hits him, then several people get it. So the more infectious the bacteria or virus is, the more people you need to have immunized to achieve herd immunity. And that depends on how infectious it is. One of the most infectious viruses is measles. I wrote here R0 of 12 to 18. R0 means the number of people that in an unvaccinated society that virus will spread to. So every person with measles will send it 12 to 18. And so for herd immunity, you need about 95% of people to be vaccinated. COVID, as bad as we think it was, compared to measles, is nothing. 2 to 3 people. 2.5 to 3 people. I think 2.5 to 3.5. Which means we need about 67% to be immune. However, because COVID mutates, it changes. So you can't really achieve herd immunity. It changes, and now it's a new game all over again.
Jason, a virus like measles stays the same? It doesn't mutate?
It doesn't change.
Okay.
Or not much.
Okay.
Or not enough to evade the immune system.
Right.
It still stays around.
So, yeah, but
Well,
did we
Well,
wipe out
we can
measles?
talk about that in a moment. In the United States, hasn't stayed around. It stayed around in areas like Africa,
So it did, okay.
in which it wasn't. But we'll get back to that in just a moment.
Okay, that answers that.
I'm going to skip over this long list of the vaccines recommended. We can talk about policy later, but know that these are diseases that can be treated in kids, prevented in kids. We'll talk about some of these in a moment. And recommendations for adults, too. But let's talk about vaccine successes. Let's talk about what we know, what has been shown to be effective. And I want to point out this came from a book. Much of this, what I'm going to talk about now, came from a book by an old professor of mine who is at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who's an expert in vaccinology and has a series of wonderful books about medicine in general, named Paul Offit. COVID, by 1 year in, July 2001, 200 million people were infected and 4 million have died. As I'll show you in the slide later, I think now it's only 500 people a day are getting it in the United States. The numbers are down, but huge at that time. Smallpox has killed 500 million people. It's now eliminated from the face of the earth. Rabies, it had a mortality rate of 100%. It's now preventable. Yellow fever, pandemics of yellow fever in the 1800s killed 10% of the population in Philadelphia and killed 30% of the population in New Orleans. It's now eliminated in the United States and Europe. Mumps, it was one of the most common cause of deafness in kids and adults. It's now essentially eliminated. And many homes for the deaf have closed because there are not enough new people who are deaf from this to need them.
I thought smallpox had come back. No, it's gone.
Smallpox is gone. Polio. Polio's come back. We can talk about that too. It's not on our list. Diphtheria. The yearly deaths in the U.S. with vaccination went from 15,000 a year to 5 deaths. Tetanus. Deaths went from 200 to 15. Pertussis, whooping cough, went from 8,000 deaths per year to 10. Chickenpox causes brain inflammation. That also brain inflammation, meningitis, liver inflammation, pneumonia. There were prior to the vaccination, there were 4 million infections and 10,000 hospitalizations, 100 deaths a year, and it's 99% eradicated now. But coming back. Rubella. Rubella is not a severe disease in most people, but it is in pregnant women, where it causes about 20,000 birth defects yearly. The birth defects include blindness, heart defects, deafness, and spontaneous abortion and death of the baby afterward. In 1963 and 64, there was a horrible epidemic affecting 12 million people, multiple tens of thousands of birth defects, deaths, etc. But after the vaccine, 2005, in the US, the virus is eliminated. And in the past 20 years, worldwide, we've gone from 670,000 cases a year to 49,000. Hepatitis B also spreads by body fluids and from mothers to their babies, to the fetus during childbirth. 18,000 children less than 10 years old are infected yearly, and most will develop severe lifelong liver disease, cirrhosis, even liver cancer. But since vaccination has been done to newborns in the early 1990s, it's virtually eliminated in children. And hopefully we'll see later in life less liver disease and liver cancer thanks to that. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been crucial in immunizations around the world and has led to immunization of over 85% of the world at this point. HPV, human papillomavirus, causes over 90% of cervical cancer and 60 to 70% of malignancies of the mouth and tongue and throat called oropharyngeal cancer. We didn't know about this until about 10, 15 years ago, the oral cancers, but it's the fastest increase in growth of cancers, of all cancers in the world. Since the vaccine for HPV, there's been a 27% decline in women of cervical cancer. And in those girls that were vaccinated before 17 years old, there seems to be an 88% lower rate of cervical cancer. So if we could vaccinate all girls, we could expect somewhere like an 88% decline down the line in cervical cancer.
Well, they're doing it for the boys too, right?
And now they're also recommended in boys up to 27. It's recommended to be done about age 11 or 12, but they're doing up to 20, I think 26 now. figuring after 26 you probably have gotten it already through sexual or non-sexual contact. Deep tongue kissing, deep throat kissing can transmit it, we think. But yes, so they're doing it in boys too, and in fact, that's what I tell people. We're not doing this, it's not a sexual disease anymore.
Right.
No.
And in boys, it's going to prevent the oropharyngeal cancer.
Right.
Look at this, the risk of, if you have HPV, the risk of oral cancer in your lifetime is 0.7% for males and 0.4 in women. So, 70 out of 1,000 people will get it if I'm vaccinated.
And they want that to be done before 17, huh? Is that?
Preferably younger the better before you can get it. I think they pick these ages before 17 because that's typically when sexual contact, which is probably more frequent than non-sexual contact, gives it.
And is this part of, your regular family doctor, would they automatically
Yes.
give that as part of?
They should recommend it.
Yeah, okay.
Rotavirus killed 500,000 babies every year in the world. Hundreds of lives are saved every day. In the U.S., there's been an 80% decrease in rotavirus deaths and prevented 40 to 50% of hospitalizations from that. The bacteria, there are many more viruses that we have treatments for than bacteria, but the three that we do are Haemophilus influenza B, pneumococcus, meningococcus, H flu used to cause, besides meningitis, it also caused throat swelling that looked like croup. And me, as an ear, nose, and throat doctor, used to get called in all the time early in my practice to make sure that it wasn't epiglottitis, which would kill you in hours. Now it's gone. I wasn't called in the last 10 years of my practice, 15 years, 20 years, never called at all after the vaccine came out. Pneumococcus is not just a benign pneumonia, it's a very severe pneumonia that can also cause brain infections, meningitis, brain infections. Meningococcus is a bacteria that causes very severe and quick brain swelling and infection. In hours, you can go from getting a headache to death, often in teenagers. Kids are vaccinated young, but it wears off after 5 or 8 years, lessens, and so a booster dose is given, and you may hear of these colleges or sports teams that all of a sudden get the meningitis, or that one kid gets meningitis, and they rush to get everyone immunized in a day, because they can die in a day. They can go to bed at night with a headache and wake up in the morning dead. Influenza is not just a cold. Still, now, we had 279 children die of flu-related complications like inflammation of the heart and encephalitis. 8 to 10% of those hospitalized kids had neurological symptoms, meaning affected brain or nervous system. Last flu system was severe for kids because less than 50% were immunized, and that set up the easy spread. How do we know what? Because remember, we're talking about what do we need? Which do we need? H1, H2, H15, N1, N4.
Right.
The World Health Organization, the FDA, looked at 130 countries around the world to see what is circulating during our summer and what's going to come to us next winter, especially southern hemisphere like Australia. And they try to predict, and they pick a handful of each to put in the vaccine. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong.
Yeah.
When they're right, when they get an effective match, it lowers the chance of getting disease by 50%. Even when they get it wrong, it lowers the chance of getting disease by 25%. And in either case, it lowers, whether the vaccine is a good match or bad, it lowers the chance of being hospitalized by 75%.
Is this more for older people or kids as well, or?
Well, for everybody. Let's talk about one more thing, I'm going to answer that. Flu generally affected older people. It kills older people. Affects everyone, kills the older people. But not the Spanish flu of 1918. It killed teens and 20-year-olds. And all of a sudden, you had no workforce after the Spanish flu. Spanish flu probably started in the United States. It infected 500 million people, half the world's population. And in the US, in 1 month, 400,000 Americans died of the flu, of the Spanish flu. But it killed young adults. It also happened during the World War. in the First World War. So it spread by our troops all over the world. And it didn't affect Spain. In fact, that's why it's called Spanish flu. The Spanish weren't, in the war, they didn't care about saying that they got flu, but the French and the British and the Russians and Americans didn't want to talk about how many deaths there were. It was the most devastating attack in history, and again, more outbreaks are going to occur. But that flu affected the middle, young people, which is why babies should be vaccinated as well against the flu. I didn't mention RSV in this talk, but that's another respiratory syncytial virus. Now, just in the past year, as a vaccine, effective vaccine, safe, that is recommended for kids and adults over 65, I believe. Those who are most at risk for severe disease.
We have had that once, right?
Yes, correct. Measles, not just the cough, runny nose, it affects the heart, kidneys, eyes, brain, ears. It also, in kids, causes something called SSPE, where 8 years later, on average, you get this devastating neurological disease that is fatal. 8 million children in the world were affected before the vaccine, and now just 200,000. In the United States, 4 million people used to get it. Now less than 50 until recently. This is 2003. This is 2004. That is the week of the year, cumulative number of measles. It spiked up, and this so far is 2006. We're getting certainly an epidemic of measles. Last year, there were 2,300 cases in 50 outbreaks. So far, 2016, there have been 1,000 cases in 10 outbreaks. The United Kingdom, Canada, all lost their measles-free designation last year. The US is going to lose it in a month, next month. It's very highly contagious, and up to 90% of people who are not immune will get measles if they come into contact with a susceptible person, infected person. The measles vaccine is very effective. 93% after one dose and 97% after 2 doses are protected for a lifetime with the vaccine. And herd immunity requires, again, 95% to be vaccinated. A big, big number. The vaccination rate dropped in the last few years from 95% for kindergartners to 92%, and that opened the door for outbreaks. Once that went down low, with less than herd immunity. And 12% of the 4,000 people in 2001 that were, 2001 to 2022, were breakthrough infections in immunized people. Meaning that, remember I said a vaccine doesn't necessarily prevent you from getting it. It may lessen the chance of getting it, make it less severe. But breakthrough infections can occur. So when someone chooses not to be vaccinated near you, you can still get it, which is why you're helping someone else by getting the vaccine, and they're helping you. And if you have a cancer and can't be vaccinated, or you're on a medication like steroids, or like an anti-rheumatoid arthritis medication, or psoriasis medication, it impairs your immune system. And if you do get vaccinated, it may not work. So you're helping other people. They also found in the past 3 months that measles gets rid of those memory cells. Remember we talked about the memory T cells against other bacteria, other viruses? They drop for at least 3 months after getting that. So infectious diseases spike, other infectious diseases spike after having measles to other things. Japan did away with their vaccines in the 1990s and led to flu and pneumonia outbreaks, rubella outbreaks.
In 1994, mandatory Japanese flu vaccines for children, which had been mandated, were made elective, amidst public doubt about the vaccine effectiveness. Vaccination rates plummeted, and cases of influenza among school children and deaths in the elderly soared due to influenza and pneumonia. In addition, great outbreaks of rubella occurred. An unfounded media scare turned the public away from HPV vaccines, the virus that is responsible for nearly all cases of cervical cancer. In fact, There are several human cancers triggered by viruses that can be prevented by vaccination. The first cancer virus was a papillomavirus that caused horn-like projections to grow on rabbits, causing some people to think that there was a separate animal called a jackalope seen in this picture. Marek's disease is a cancerous growth in chickens caused by a herpes virus. In humans, liver cancer is often caused by hepatitis B. Cervical cancer and cancers of the throat are increasingly caused by a human papillomavirus, and the ability to prevent cancers has been shown by vaccination. mRNA is being studied as a method to train the immune system to recognize and attack cancer cells, a promising treatment for many cancers, and perhaps revolutionizing treatment with a long-lasting immune response that we can't get with chemotherapy alone. As in many things in science, things can go wrong. In 1942, a yellow fever vaccine made with human serum contaminated with hepatitis B infected 30,000 military members and killing 1,000. In 1955, one of 5 pharmaceutical companies made a live polio vaccine incorrectly and gave it to 220,000 people, a small fraction of them sustaining death or permanent disability. In the 1960s, an early vaccine for RSV found that those vaccinated were more likely to be hospitalized and die from pneumonia than those who got an infection and were unvaccinated. 2 early versions of the measles vaccines also had this problem. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a neurological disease that usually occurs unrelated to vaccines, but rather as a complication of having certain other bacterial or viral illnesses. It occurs 1 or 2 times in every 100,000 people yearly in the United States, meaning 10 to 20 million cases occur yearly. It became associated with flu vaccines after the 1976 swine flu vaccine did seem to cause an increased risk of getting the disease. It does occur rarely after having the Shingrix, Janssen COVID-19, and influenza vaccines, but the risk is small, perhaps 1 to 2 additional cases per million doses. However, one is 40 to 70 times more likely to get Guillain-Barré syndrome from having the flu rather than from getting the flu vaccine. So how do vaccines get tested for efficacy and safety? There are 4 phases of clinical trials. Phase 1 uses dozens to hundreds of people to look for the basic information like side effects and whether it develops an immune response. Then, Phase 2 is of hundreds of people looking at subunits of the population, for example, age, sex, and race, and further look at the side effects and whether it develops an immune response. If found safe and effective, even larger groups of tens of thousands of people are studied to see if the vaccine works in real life, while still studying side effects and safety. After FDA approval, Phase 4 continues looking for efficacy over a long period of time and whether uncommon side effects occur over that time. This slide summarizes the process of a company getting approval for vaccine use and the various committees that have a say in its approval. After a vaccine is licensed, then the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, made up of medical and public health experts, develop recommendations for its use. For example, in what age groups is it shown to be effective and appropriate versus how serious the disease would be without a vaccine, and the likelihood of getting the disease if there was no vaccine. After vaccines are rolled out, continuing monitoring for safety of the vaccine is done through the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, allowing anyone to report a problem, whether a physician, a healthcare worker, a patient, a parent, etc. The FDA continues to track the manufacturer's vaccine quality. Many people have been concerned that the COVID vaccine was developed so quickly and must have not been studied well. To understand how it could get through the approval process so quickly, it's important to recognize that the speed was primarily due to the removal of traditional bottlenecks. First off, there have been decades of scientific study on mRNA technology. Investigations begun after previous coronaviruses outbreak in the past couple of decades, like SARS and MERS. For this pandemic, there was massive funding by governments and organizations which removed any financial risks manufacturers had to try to produce an effective vaccine and thus not have to worry about losing money if they failed or if the product was not as good as another company's product. This allowed many companies to devote their resources to making a vaccine. Instead of having one stage of the trial be studied before the next stage was approved and begun, there was also a parallel development with overlapping phases of clinical trials being allowed, and also vaccine production by the manufacturers being worked on even before those products were fully licensed. Through global collaboration and sharing of the virus's genetic sequence, scientists worldwide were able to begin research, and regulatory agencies conducted rolling reviews, developing data as it became available, rather than waiting for the end of the trial process. So let's look at each of these points a little more deeply. Coronaviruses are so named because they have spiked proteins on their surface, which gives them a crown-like appearance, or corona, when looked at under an electron microscope. The first human coronavirus was called SARS, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, occurring in 2003, emanating from China, mostly affecting Asia and only infecting about 8,000 people, of which 10%, or 800, died. Its outbreak was brief and did not last long enough for vaccines at the time to be developed. In 2008, there was an outbreak in the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, MERS, originally from the Middle East, but spreading in Europe and North America. 2,500 people were infected, and 35% of them died, 900 in total. Again, it didn't last long enough for a vaccine to be developed. As this slide shows, however, development of mRNA vaccines, and especially those for the coronavirus, have been worked on since 2003. The basic technology and concepts for the development of a coronavirus vaccine were well underway when the COVID-19 virus hit. The biggest factor that allowed the various vaccines to be tested for safety and efficacy was the sheer number of people who got infected so quickly by the virus. Often the limiting factor in making a virus and studying its efficacy is the time it takes to recruit enough people to voluntarily join the study, and then in waiting even longer for enough people to get sick with the disease to understand the potential vaccine benefits. For an infectious disease with a low current infectivity, this can take quite a long time. For example, the very deadly but rare Ebola virus might take years to get enough people in a trial, and then wait long enough for some of them to get Ebola to determine if the vaccine was helpful. It may take many years just to get a few hundred people. But with COVID-19, there was a huge population available worldwide, and in just a fraction of a year, 30 to 40,000 people were studied in each of 3 major vaccines that came to market in the United States. This allowed for rapid assessment of the efficacy of the vaccine to prevent clinical infection, safety profile for the vaccine in the short run, and set the stage for ongoing monitoring for long-term safety. After 5 years now of monitoring, the safety profile has been ongoingly studied. So let's talk a bit about the disease COVID-19. Spread by the respiratory droplet route, the SARS-CoV-2 virus binds to a receptor called ACE2 receptor, which causes injury to the lungs like pneumonia and pulmonary embolism, but also attacks blood vessels, leading to clots and inflammation and injury to other organs. This helps to explain why problems such as blood clots, limb amputation, heart attack, heart muscle injury and pericardial injury, renal failure, brain inflammation, and other problems occur. COVID-19 is not just a respiratory disease, but a blood vessel disease as well. An area of great interest now is long COVID. This is a problem with symptoms that may linger for weeks, months, or even years after infection, usually with extreme fatigue, brain fog, dizziness, or other symptoms, including even heart palpitations. 20% of long COVID patients require sick leave longer than a month, and several studies show that 10 to 30% of hospitalized COVID-19 survivors may develop long COVID. Long COVID may also be present after mild or asymptomatic infections. MRI studies of college athletes that previously had COVID were positive for inflammation of the heart muscle in 15% and injury to the heart muscle in almost 31%. An area of great interest now is long COVID. This is a problem with symptoms that may linger for weeks, months, or even years after infection, usually with extreme fatigue, brain fog, dizziness, and other symptoms that might even include heart palpitations. 20% of long COVID patients may require. Let's talk about the efficacy of the COVID vaccine. In 2021, the mRNA vaccine was found to be over 90% effective in preventing symptomatic disease and 85 to 90% effective in preventing hospitalizations and death. Some benefit was seen in preventing long COVID as well. In that first year of vaccination, it's believed that vaccination prevented 14.4 million deaths worldwide. Some critics were skeptical about that number, concerned that hospitals might append COVID-19 as a cause of death of the patient who in fact died from something else, thus inflating the perceived lethality of COVID. However, if one looks at the number of people that die every year from all diseases worldwide and compares it to how many people died that same year during the COVID epidemic, you'd find that more people died that year than other years, and those excessive deaths would be due to acquiring COVID-19. Looking at the lives saved that first year in this way, vaccinations prevented 19.8 million deaths, a global reduction of 63%. Modeling studies estimate that if everyone in the United States from 2004 to 2024 to 2025 were vaccinated, it would have prevented 10 to 20% of hospitalizations and deaths compared to no vaccination, with additional indirect benefits compared to only vaccinating high-risk groups. It's also important to understand the concept of relative risk. That is, we need to consider the risk of problems from or after getting the vaccine compared to the risk of the disease without the vaccine. For example, problems like pericarditis and Guillain-Barré syndrome are more likely to occur and be more severe from contracting the virus itself than if it occurs after getting the vaccine. Athletes in the Big Ten Conference were studied and found that 1 out of every 43 young men and women, about 2.5%, who got COVID virus had evidence of myocarditis, unrelated to getting vaccinated. If we can make a vaccine for coronavirus, then why can't we make one for common cold viruses? The biggest problem is that there are more than 100 different types of viruses that cause the common cold, and that they don't share a protein important or critical enough for their disease-causing ability that we can identify and target. The holy grail would be to find some part of these different viruses that we could teach the immune system to attack successfully. There are societal problems with vaccines that we have to deal with. They're expensive. Some people have concerns about maintaining moral behavior after the HPV vaccine lessens the risk of intercourse as a way of contracting a cancer-causing virus. The profitability of certain other drugs and vaccines may steer Big Pharma from developing other less profitable vaccines. Also, there are issues of morality with the use of fetal cells derived from abortion in studying and producing vaccines, which we'll touch on in a moment. There's a bit of a paradox. For decades, we as a society have been blessed by relatively good health with regard to infectious disease, thanks to vaccines being used and from antibiotics treating bacterial infections. As a society, we've forgotten what life was like 100 years ago, and would likely be again if we don't adequately vaccinate. Especially important to consider this since, as a result of autoimmune disease and the widespread use of medications like steroids, many more people in the United States have a weakened immune system as they did 50 years ago, making illnesses more likely and more dangerous. Expert virologist and infectious disease physician Paul Offit has written about what might happen if we stopped vaccinating. Pertussis would recur first, he says. Even with vaccines, currently it affects 1 million teens and adults yearly, but most deaths are in babies. In the 1940s, 8,000 babies died a year. In England during the 1970s, when the rate of vaccination dropped from 80% to 30%, within a few years, more than 100,000 children were hospitalized and 70 had died. Next, measles would recur. Just a year or two ago, measles infections were rare in the United States, though not in the world, where more than 1 million people were infected yearly. Over the past year in the United States, we've been getting thousands and thousands of measles recurring in non-immunized populations. Rubella would recur again, causing birth defects and fetal death. Mumps would recur and cause outbreaks of deafness. In 2006, a mumps epidemic in the Midwest affected 4,000 people, causing seizures, meningitis, and deafness. In England, 70,000 people were infected due to low immunization rates because of the false concerns over MMR vaccines causing autism. Haemophilus influenza type B, HIB, would again recur, leading to tens of thousands of infections yearly, causing developmental delay, hearing loss, paralysis, airway infections, and death. After 10 years, polio would recur. In 1978 and again in 1992, outbreaks of polio were seen in the Netherlands in those unvaccinated for religious reasons, causing many cases of paralysis. The outbreak did not spread into the general population since 90% of people were vaccinated. Diphtheria would recur, as it did in the 1990s during the breakup of the Soviet Union, when immunizations were not given often, and 50,000 people contracted diphtheria. One commonly heard concern about vaccines is that there is foreign DNA in the vaccines that will get into our DNA. That concern is unfounded. Any vaccine that uses DNA has had that DNA inserted into a vector virus where they code for proteins. That DNA is in the cell of the cell culture, but then that cell culture is broken apart and all DNA is stripped out. There are no enzymes capable of bringing any of the insignificant amount of possible DNA fragments from the cytoplasm into the cell nucleus, and then no further way for the DNA to be incorporated into the host's DNA. In the past, fetal cells have been used to make vaccines. In 1966, lung cells from a 14-week-old fetus terminated for medical reasons were used to make vaccines for rubella, chickenpox, and hepatitis A. Other fetal cell lines collected in the 1970s and 80s were used for other vaccines, including influenza and some of the new COVID-19 vaccines. No fetal material is present in any final vaccine. The great advantage of fetal tissue to produce a vaccine is that we know that there are not other viruses in those cells that could incorporate themselves into the newly created vaccine. The moral issues about the use of vaccine-grown fetal cell lines have been discussed and written about by the Catholic Church, and their position is that the current cell lines are distant from the initial termination, and they state that the acceptance of such vaccines where there are no other appropriate alternatives does not signify cooperation with abortion. In fact, a recent U.S. Bishops' Conference position said that Catholics can take 2 of the 3 available COVID-19 vaccines, even though they were developed with a remote connection to morally compromised cell lines. It also said that it is permissibly morally, in some circumstances, to receive the 3rd vaccine developed in close connection with aborted cell lines, but states that Catholics cannot allow the pandemic to desensitize or weaken their determination to oppose the evil of abortion. Our current HHS administration has been changing recommendations regarding routine vaccination. The number of recommended vaccines for children has been reduced, as has been the number of diseases targeted by these vaccines. Many experts are concerned that, for example, the HHS has recommended against routine meningococcal immunizations since the disease is infrequent. However, it is infrequent because so many kids are now immunized. Without the vaccine being given regularly, this could lead to a flare of this very devastating disease. This slide shows recent changes in the U.S. pediatric vaccine recommendations as of January 5th, 2026. The red dashes and lines highlight those vaccine recommendations that have changed. Many experts have also raised concern about the suggestion by the head of the HHS that all vaccines be tested against placebo, quote, to unmask the risk profile, close quote. What the suggestion means in practice is to randomly assign some people to get a placebo, which is essentially no treatment, knowing and expecting them to get a harmful infectious disease. This puts people at risk and is certainly unethical. In the current system, all new products are tested against an existing known effective treatment to see if the new product is more, less, or equally effective, also allowing investigation of a side effect of the medication compared to other treatments. What about autism and vaccines? With regard to the MMR vaccine, all good science has rejected the suggestion that vaccines, including MMR, cause autism. The only article claiming that vaccines cause autism was written by Andrew Wakefield in 1988, and this paper has been debunked. Over the next decade after it was published, over 14 separate studies of over 600,000 children show that MMR vaccination does not cause autism. In 2004, it was discovered that the Wakefield study was supported by a malpractice lawyer, and that 2 years before the publication, he had received £55,000 from that personal injury lawyer who sent him 5 of the 8 children in the study. 10 of the original 13 authors withdrew support for the article. Wakefield has had criminal charges filed against him in England for fraud, but he then moved to the United States and has worked in Florida, then Texas, where he still lectures on the dangers of vaccines. Another concern was that mercury in vaccines might be a cause of autism. A mercury-containing product called thimerosal was added to vaccines that were bottled in vials meant to hold multiple doses to prevent contamination of the vial. One type of mercury, called methylmercury, had been shown to cause brain damage, though only in higher doses, not in low doses. Thimerosal, however, contained a much less toxic form of mercury called ethylmercury at a low dose. But even any risk from the use of that type of mercury was subsequently eliminated by making all vaccines in single-use vials. Since then, multiple studies have shown no increase in the incidence of autism in those who took vaccines with thimerosal. Also, a study from Canada, in which the children in different geographic areas had been given different vaccines with different amounts of thimerosal in them, found no variation in the incidence of autism in kids who got different amounts of thimerosal in the vaccines. In fact, in that review, more autism were found in the kids who were given vaccines with no thimerosal. The bottom line is that there is no scientific evidence that anything related to vaccination causes autism. There are some interesting historical dilemmas and current issues that I'd like to touch on briefly. This woman is Typhoid Mary, so called because she was an asymptomatic carrier that infected 57 people and caused 2 deaths. In the early 1990s, she had been a cook in 4 different affluent New York households over a decade, and she wound up infecting many of those households. In 1907, it was recognized that she was the cause of the infection and was forcibly quarantined in a New York City hospital for the next 3 years. She was released in 1910 after promising to not again be a cook. In 1915, she was again quarantined after it was found that she worked at a maternity hospital in which there was an outbreak of 25 cases of typhoid with 2 deaths. She remained confined until her death in 1938. There were also 400 other carriers in that hospital, many of them released in the community, but never Mary. This case raised ethical concerns about the balance between liberty and public health. When thinking about appropriately balancing public health and personal liberties, including the right to be required to receive a vaccine, I think it's important to consider the likelihood of the person infecting others and the consequence of them affecting others. While certainly this discussion is bigger than appropriate in this lecture, one question to consider is whether a member of the public has the ability to choose around whom they are. With regards to healthcare, a person might choose to go to the dentist or not to go to the dentist, but they may not be able to choose not to go to the emergency room for treatment of a potentially severe medical problem that requires emergency care. Thus, it makes more sense to require an emergency room employee to be vaccinated than the dentist, who can put a sign out in front of his office declaring that he is not vaccinated and those with concern should not see him. Another concern is the virus being spread in terms of the job of the person's co-workers and future contacts and responsibilities. This slide is intended to be thought-provoking. It asks the question whether the people pointed to by the arrow owe it to others to be vaccinated. This man who works with pilots or astronauts. This woman astronaut who will be in a space station with other astronauts for a prolonged period of time. This person working closely with others doing dangerous work. This EMT person who is called to attend to someone who is ill. Ben Franklin had a change in position regarding vaccines over his lifetime. In 1721, over half of Boston's 11,000 citizens caught smallpox, and a prominent physician suggested variolation, that very early type of vaccination in which you are inoculated with a hopefully weakened form of the virus in an attempt to prevent getting a severe, more deadly strain from others. Franklin advocated against variolation in his brother's newspaper. During that outbreak, 248 people were inoculated and 6 of them died. In the general public, 6,000 caught smallpox and 144 died. Therefore, there was a 2.1% chance of dying from inoculation versus an almost 15% of chance of dying and a larger chance of blindness or scarring if you did get the smallpox. If the chances of getting smallpox if unvaccinated was 50%, then the unvaccinated were 3 times more likely to wind up dead than if variolation was done. What would you do? In 1736, his son died of smallpox. In his autobiography, he wrote, "I long regretted bitterly and still regret that I had not given it to him by inoculation. This I mention for the sake of parents who omit that operation on the supposition that they should never forgive themselves if a child died under it. My example showing that the regret may be the same either way and that therefore the safer should be chosen." I hope you enjoyed this lecture and found it informative.